All right, we are live. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today I'm joined by Lloyd, and we are going to be looking at Dawah, which is basically the Muslim equivalent of evangelism, outreach to non-Muslims, trying to convince them to convert to Islam. Specifically, we're going to be running through a Dawah manual by Bilal Phillips. We looked at a few, they're all more or less the same. A lot of what we're going to look at is not particularly offensive. A lot of it's just plain good advice. But we do see two major problems when we look at this. One, what he says doesn't match practice in my experience or Lloyd's experience. The Muslims that we talk to are not using any of these, what would be considered good advice, I would say. The other problem we see is that he is doing a lot of things that manipulate both the reader of the Dawah manual and teach them how to manipulate others. So without further ado, I'm going to open us with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time together. Thank you for the technology that allows us to reach around the world. For the past 1400 years, Islam has been able to live in a bubble, so to speak, that there was very little outside contact. And because of this, it was very difficult to reach Muslims, but those times are changing. And I am just, for one, I'm very excited to be alive at this particular time, the first time really that Christians can reach Muslims in a significant way. I ask that any Muslims listening today approach what we have to say with an open mind, and that they eventually come to know you the way that I know you. In Jesus' name, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So it's been a little while since we had a live stream on my channel with Lloyd. So why don't you go ahead and give us a few words of introduction?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Lloyd de Jong is my name. South African. Lived 11 years, just under 11 years in the Middle East. Had an opportunity to travel extensively to see the Islamic culture. Made friends. Enjoyed my time there. Did very well career-wise. However, I also went to many of the worst places, many of the hotspots, many of the war zones as part of my work. And I really started to wonder what was causing all this conflict, all of this dysfunction that I was seeing. And it was through studying the text that I started to see the application of this. What woke me up with two things. One was going to Lebanon to see what a formerly Christian country being essentially Islamized, what that looked like and the amount of violence that had happened. That made me concerned for the West. Two, studying counterterrorism at a university in Europe. I realized just how much the faculty were kowtowing to the Muslims on the forum. They were afraid to criticize. We couldn't discuss Islamic terrorism. It was completely haram. We could criticize Christian terrorists, Buddhist terrorists, and that was frightening because you had these completely ignorant counter-terror trained analysts going into industry who had a completely false view, and the faculty was supporting this, and that was frightening. And I also don't focus on the Quran. I don't focus on the Hadith. I focus on the other documents that are far more substantial and far more important within Islam, actually. This would be the documents that comprise the Sharia, the fiqh, the jurisprudence, as well as the tafsir and the sirah, the biographies, the prophetic biographies. The Sharia is the interpretation of the Quran. It is the exegesis of the Quran and the Sunnah. So it is the final interpretation by the scholars, and it is the major opinions which form the scholarly agreement within Islam, which is how Islam is viewed today. The Quran is what the scholars say it is, and Islam is what the scholars say it is. So that's where you find what the scholars say it is. So yeah, today we're looking at Dawah, and we're going to look at what their apologists are trained to believe and to say, how they're trained to deal with our objections, and of course how they train their missionaries in the way that they lie. And also what is sad is that you discover that these apologists and missionaries are lied to by their own senior scholars. Over to you, Thaddeus.
Excellent, thank you. Ms. Piggy said that my volume was pretty low. So I went into settings, and indeed somehow it had been turned way down. So hopefully it's better now. I turned it up. I also wanted to give a shout out to Chako Kurian, who gave a super chat before we got started. No comment, just a donation. Thank you very much for that. So my name is Thaddeus, and I've been doing Christian apologetics for the last 20 years or so on an informal basis. About 2 years ago, I was introduced to Islam by chance, and the Lord has been working on me, making me realize that this is an area that there's a lot of need. There's lots and lots of Christians talking about atheism. There's Christians talking about Mormonism, but there's not a lot of Christians talking about Islam, especially when you consider that Islam is the world's second most popular religion with well over 1 billion adherents. On a per capita basis, there's probably 100 times more people talking about atheism than Islam. So I decided to get involved in this area, and I've been started my YouTube channel about a year ago, and that is why I am here. So I think that Lloyd would like to start us off with what we call an Islamic fun fact.
Yeah, a little fun fact. Okay, so I think my screen is now shared. I will go to, let's bring this up. Right. Are you seeing my screen, Thaddeus? Doesn't popped up yet. Okay, so let's read this. This is Sunan an-Nasai, Volume 2, Book 11, Hadith 934. Aisha said, this person asked the Messenger of Allah, how does revelation come to you? And he said, like the ringing of a bell. And when it departs, I remember what the angel said, and this is the hardest on me. And sometimes the angel comes to me in the form of a man and gives it to me. So this tells us that when Muhammad had revelation, when he heard a bell, this had the deepest effect in him. This had the most potent effect on him. Because sometimes we read in the sources that he would be very much out of breath. He would look as if he'd just run a mile at a sprint. He'd be sweating. Sometimes he'd even be unconscious. So clearly this was very, very hard on him. So he heard the ringing of a bell, and this had a very profound effect on him. This was the hardest on him. Now let's have a look at jihad, okay, in the Kitab al-Jihad. And this is from Sunan Abu Dawud, from the Kitab al-Sitta, regarding bells. And Abu Hurairah reported that the Apostle of Allah, that's Muhammad, saying, the bell is a wooden wind musical instrument of Satan. So Muhammad says the bell is a instrument of Satan. And yet here, when he got revelation, he would hear the ringing of a bell. So if the bell is an instrument of Satan, he heard Satan's bell, and they would receive revelations from Satan. What are your thoughts, Thaddeus, and what do you guys think in the comments? How do we interpret this?
This might be one of those rare times when Muhammad was correct. The same thing happened when he originally started to receive revelation. When he was squeezed in the cave, he thought he was being attacked by demons, and he was later convinced otherwise. But this might be one of those times where he actually made a correct statement.
Yeah, I mean, this is very concerning. I mean, this is a real concern. Because remember, he had the satanic verses. He received the satanic revelations. We've got this written about by Ibn Kathir. You've got Ibn Abbas. You've got Sirat Rasulullah. All of them mention it. And then suddenly in the 1300s, it just disappears. Clearly, it's an embarrassment for them. But this is further corroboration of the fact that he was receiving revelations from Satan. Not to say every revelation came from Satan, but certainly some of them did, and on a prolonged period. So yeah, that's Muhammad for you. That's definitely Muhammad for you.
Yeah, and I also wanted to point out that you said how he would wrap himself up and how he would sweat and stuff when he got a revelation, and this has a lot of connections to Jewish mysticism, actually. And
Right.
Critique's been doing a lot of work on that lately. So if you're interested in learning more about what Muhammad may have been trying to do when he was wrapping himself up in a blanket and inducing sweat, and why the revelations were so hard for him and that kind of thing, check out Islam Critique's channel.
Right. Yeah, so we will cover some more interesting fun facts as we go, but I just thought that was something that we need to consider. Bells, also don't forget, Muhammad hated crosses, and also the bell is the symbol of Well, it's a Christian symbol. So it's very interesting. He associates it with evil. He literally inverted everything. So yeah. Yeah, I don't know how one would interpret that.
Before we jump in, we got a couple comments. Taishian said that more or less said that he would like to be more vocal about Islam, but the country he lives in and the work he does prevents him from doing a lot. I would just online you can be anonymous and you can talk to as many people as you want online. So I would encourage you to, just stay anonymous online, use a fake name, and do it that way. Kevin Robinson said that he's reminded of the ringing of Christian bells is forbidden in Muslim countries.
Yeah.
In Egypt, they use a knacker, a wooden clapper board to call sacred liturgy. So yeah, that's another possibility of why Mama was saying that the bell is the instrument of Satan, because it was a specific attack against Christianity.
I would think so. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's odd that people believe that they can have an interfaith dialogue when Islam is hostile to Christianity. It is inherently violently hostile to Christianity. Yep. So if nothing further, we can.
Yep.
In Saudi Arabia, a lot of underground Christian groups. That's interesting. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I've been to Saudi Arabia.
Yep. So today we're going to be looking at a work by Bilal Phillips called Dawah Training. As I said, a lot of this material isn't offensive. We're not going to be just pulling out offensive parts. We're going to be going through it all, because the idea here is we want the Christians to really understand how Muslims do Dawah so that they can better be prepared to refute it. He starts off here by just defining what Dawah is. He says that it's derived from an Arabic word meaning to call, specifically calling people to Islam. He says that the Dawah is the basic mission of the prophets of God, but then he'll go on to generalize that to all people, and it's the call to worship Allah alone. Then he, to justify this, he quotes this Quran verse here. I have sent every nation a messenger proclaiming worship Allah and avoid worship of false gods. Lloyd, how many nations do you think there have been in the history of humankind?
Thousands, probably. Thousands. Over the last 7,000 years. Small ones, large ones. I mean, we don't know, but I mean, we said maybe there's 1,000 major nations that have merited having a prophet. So yeah.
Yeah. So
and that raises questions. That raises some serious questions.
Right. I mean, if there's been 1,000 nations, let's just use a nice round number, and only one of those nations ever has apparently accepted Allah's message, even though they're all given a prophet, that means Allah has a 99.9% failure rate. Why exactly should we be following a all-powerful God that fails 99.9% of the time? But actually, it's a lot worse, because in the Hadith, they claim that there's been 140,000 prophets. So we have 139,999 failed prophets. What a God.
And not only that, Muslims claim that every single prophet was Muslim, brought Islam. There is no record of it. Where was the Quran prior to that then? Where's the record or the proof of that? If you had 140,000 prophets, what are their names? Because again, the only prophets mentioned in the Quran are Jewish prophets from the Torah. Where are the other ones?
Yeah, I mean, the Quran doesn't even know. It says that every nation has a prophet, but the only prophets it can think of are, maybe a dozen, maybe 24 prophets, and they're all Jewish, every last one of them. But I thought every nation got one prophet. So why does the Quran know about 24 Jewish prophets and no prophets of any other nation?
Yeah, so these are questions that they don't ask. And also they mention here that there are awkward questions, and they try to think of ways. They say, well, look, we'll talk about that as we go. So yeah, so this is new to us. We've been reading this book. This is new to us. We're trying to understand this as well, but hopefully we'll as we go through, we'll really start to unpack this and start to understand why these Muslims say the crazy things that they do, because they are not taught. They don't read the Bible. They only know what their scholars tell them is in the Bible.
And for the most part, they don't even read the Quran. Well, they read the Quran in Arabic, but they don't know Arabic, so it's essentially reading gibberish.
Yeah. So yeah, going on. So
Yep. So then he goes into a couple more Quran verses to try to justify the use of dawah here. And this 41:33 is kind of interesting because the verse says, "Who is better in speech than the one who calls to Allah, does righteous deeds, and says, 'Indeed, I am among the Muslims.'" But he's going to change that subtly to make it say, "Who is better than the one who calls other people to Allah?" But in its context, it really looks like it's just saying people who call upon Allah as their God
people
are,
pray to Allah. Yeah.
yeah.
If you read it in context, it says, "You who praise to Allah, you are doing a good deed." And he twists that to say that those who call others to Allah, there is no context for that at all.
And then he says the best words that any human being can speak are words of guidance, inviting people to Islam. The reward for giving dawah must be tremendous. And I think, and then he's going to go on, the next several paragraphs are about all the rewards you get. I don't know about anyone else, but certainly I'm not talking about Christianity because I'm expecting a reward from God. I'm talking about Christianity because, my God is really amazing, and I want other people to experience the same thing I experience. Indeed, the only reward that the Bible promises for people talking about Christianity is persecution in return. So
Yeah.
it's a really strong contrast here that in Islam, it's all about what you get from God.
But also there's the issue of chasing points, the barakat, like every good deed would be rewarded tenfold and more. And for those who die or kill in jihad, they would get 100 times more. And those who do this will get twice as much. And so everyone's chasing points. And if you say salam alaikum, you get 1 point. Then simply because there's this doubt about salvation, there's this doubt of what happens after they die. So they try to chase these points. And even Muhammad states he had no surety of salvation himself. So there's this crazy fear at the core of Islam as well, hence they have to go through all these works to try to balance these scales by getting these little points.
Yeah, just a housekeeping note that since I'm going to be talking more today, I'll do my best to keep track of the chat, but I may not catch everything.
I'll try to keep track of the chat as well then.
Yes. So Fred asked if Adam made the Hajj, and that's a really good question.
That's a really good question. I mean, how did Muhammad get to Jerusalem to get on the horse and go to the Grand Mosque in Mecca, 70 years before it was built?
Yeah, and here Adam is a good Muslim, supposedly, so he must have done the Hajj, but even according to Islam, it had the temple hadn't been built yet. So that's pretty interesting, or the Kaaba, I mean.
Yeah.
Then there was some chat about whether Christians used bells in the 7th century, and the conclusion seemed to be that yes, Christians did use them in worship in the 7th century. And of course, I should also point out that the Hadith really rarely have a historical connection to Muhammad. So as long as Christians were using it by the 9th or 10th century, that would be sufficient to get in a Hadith.
Yeah, this reminds me somewhat of when I look at some of the mission work of groups like the Jehovah's Witnesses. Part of it, you have to go out, you have to sell, you have to call people, you have to stand in the street corner, and it's kind of like these works are critical. If it's kind of interesting, and you get an immeasurable reward. If you do this prophetic mission, so it's really just heavily based on works, and that's something that you're always chasing these points, and I don't know how that, because there's no certainty, as I said again, of salvation.
Yeah, and Fred said that a live stream must be worth minus 10 points in the point system. So
Yeah.
I guess we're just digging ourselves deeper into the hole here.
No.
So moving on, he then quotes this verse about how you, meaning the Muslims, are the best.
Sorry, my bad.
Nope, you're
Oops.
good.
I was okay. There we go. My bad. Oh, yep.
So Bilal goes on to quote this verse about how you, meaning the Muslim people, are the best nation raised for mankind. And then highlights forbidding corruption as an important
Yeah.
aspect of that.
I have something to add there if I can
Yep.
just diverge. So on this point, so they're saying now you are the best nation raised up for humankind. Now understand, while they do say nation, are they referring to the Arabs or the fact that you've joined the Ummah? Because in a very simple process where you are completely ignorant, you can become a Muslim, and now suddenly you are one of the best nation. So I'm not sure where this is. And also forbidding corruption. Now they say the word corruption. What they mean is temptation away from Islam towards other ideologies, right? But I want to have a look if everyone can see here clearly. So those are our names for those who don't know us again, Lloyd and Thaddeus. Let's look at the best of people. I want to have a look at this, right? So now, in Deuteronomy 14:2, it says, "You are a people holy to the Lord your God. Out of all the peoples on the face of the earth, the Lord has chosen you to be his treasured possession." Right? Which is interesting, right? So this is how God refers to the Jews. But now let's go have a look at the Islamic version of that. In Quran 98, verses 6-8, and I'll buy-in now the clear evidence. It says here, "Those who disbelieve among the people of the scriptures and the idolaters," that's you and me, "will abide in the fire of hell. They are the worst of created beings." It's interesting that God didn't take the time out to despise other people. He simply told the Jews, "You're my chosen people." But here the Muslims take their time to tell us that we are the worst of created beings. In Yusuf Ali, they tell us that we are the worst of creatures. In the Muhammad Shakir version, we are the worst of men. And in the Standard Corpus, we are the worst of creatures. Now, if you take the same Arabic and you pop it into Google Translate tells us that that verse actually says that we are the evil of the wilderness. And then if you go to a word-for-word meaning of the Quran, which is a dictionary of the Quran, it says that such ones, the Jews and the Christians, are the worst of creatures. But of course, if you go to the word shar, which is here, number 10, the worst, as this is translated worst, and it says the Arabic word is shar, coming from the original root ashrar, it means bad, worse, worst, evil, and wicked. So we are wicked. We are evil. So these translations are not actually accurate. We are wicked, evil creatures just by not being Muslims. Let's have a further look. So we have abandoned the truth. We are the worst of creatures. Again, we are the worst of creatures because we have abandoned. And the Muslims and who do good works are the best of created beings. They are the best of men. And according to Google Translate, they are the best of the righteous. So this is what they say. But now I want to read further. So let's go have a look at this hadith. "You, the true Muslims, are the best of peoples ever raised up for mankind. This means you are the best of people for the people as you bring them with chains on their necks till they embrace Islam. You are the best of peoples ever raised up for mankind. You're the best of peoples for the people as you bring them with chains on their necks till they embrace Islam." So this is what they're supposed to do to us. Bring us with chains on our necks till we embrace Islam. The best of people have to enslave us and do this. What do you think, Thaddeus?
Yeah, sounds very peaceful and loving, I guess. But you know, in the mindset of a 7th century conqueror, I'm sure being able to carry people around in chains did show you that you are the best of all people.
Yeah. I've got another section for later that I thought we can then go on. But that is what the best nation is. So if they're the best, we are not second best. We are evil, corrupt, wicked creatures, the worst of beasts. And they should put chains on our necks.
Yeah, and before we go on, I also wanted to point out that, if Allah was really favoring the Muslim nations, I think we should see some evidence of that in the real world. But, I've tried pretty hard to think about what Muslim countries lead the world in, and the only thing I could come up with is abuses of women's rights. Can you come up with anything they lead the world in?
Suicide bombings.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah. So yeah, and also this commentary: if they fail to believe in Allah by applying the Sharia in their governments, this is very interesting. The production of alcohol and so on. But why is it again that Muslims refuse to discuss the Sharia? Clearly, it's important that they have the Sharia, and yet they never seem to discuss it. I think this is one of their major weak points.
Yeah, I mean, we in this series that we call Islam's Apologetics, we've been looking at the Sharia law a lot, and here Bilal is telling the same thing we've been saying, that the Sharia law is what's essential. If you don't apply the Sharia law, then you are not believing in Allah.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at the comments. So yeah, so clearly Sharia is important. This is something we have to come back to again. I'd actually like to just do a series on my channel again about the Sharia. So yeah, so we have to believe in the Sharia, and that's what the best of people do. But of course, they don't want to tell us what is in the Sharia, because they realize once we know this, we would never, never follow this. So yeah.
So Fred did come up with a couple more things that Islamic countries may lead the world in. One
trade.
is the slave trade, and that's probably true even today. There is still underground slavery practiced in the Muslim world. And they also lead in cognitive dissonance, and I would say that one is certainly true.
Kevin Robinson is asking, are those verses applicable to then and not today? No, those verses are applicable for eternity. They apply through, look through some of our previous shows on jihad and on dhimmis and jizya. You'll understand that those verses will never, ever fall out of use until the entire world is dominated under Islam and everyone's a Muslim.
Very good. So then the next point that Bilal makes here is that doing dawah is obligatory. First, he says it's an obligation of everyone who has the ability, and then he goes on to refine that a bit on the next page, where he says that if you're able, or if you're the only Muslim in the area, then it's obligatory for you as an individual. But if it, there's lots of Muslims and there's someone more capable of doing it than you, then it's okay just to support dawah, through charitable donations or whatnot. And this parallels what we've seen about something else. I believe you want to say something on that, Lloyd.
Jihad. Yeah, so they speak here of two levels of dawah. Fard Ain, individual obligatory duty, and Fard Kifaya, a collective obligatory duty, right? And if it is Fard Ain on you, when no one in your country, region, or tribe takes up the responsibility of enjoining the good and forbidding evil. And these are lovely euphemisms. What they mean is committing violence to stop people from doing things you don't want them to do. Command what is good and prohibit evil, commonly known as commanding the right in the Sharia and forbidding the wrong. Here's an example of jihad taken from not the warfare use, but within communities, how you discipline people. So this is in the Sharia, looking into another's house without permission. P75.22 in the Reliance of the Traveler, the Prophet said, if a man looks at you without permission and you throw a rock at him and you knock out his eye, you would not have committed any offense. If someone looks at you without permission and you throw him in the eye with a rock and you blind him in that eye, you would not have committed an offense. And it says, whoever peeps into a house without its people's leave, they may put out his eye. So this is what the Sharia teaches. This is law in Islam. This will become the law if Sharia becomes the law. So now here's the thing. Whoever of you sees something wrong, let him change it with his hand. So if you are someone who is wanting to serve Allah and you see wrongdoing, and wrong is defined in the Sharia. Wrong is not what your reason or what your thoughts, your morals say. Wrong is what the Sharia tells you is right or wrong. You have to change it with your hand, and that changing it with your hand means using violence. If you're unable to change it with your hand, then change it with your tongue, and if unable, with your heart. And changing something with your heart is the weakest degree of faith, meaning changing something with your hand is the highest degree of faith. Let's have a look at the obligation to command the right. Let there be a group of you who call to good, commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. That's in the Quran, Quran 3:104. This verse explains that commanding the right and forbidding the wrong are a communal rather than a personal obligation. So if enough people do it, right, meaning that whenever a wrong is seen, one of those who sees it corrects it, then the responsibility is lifted from the rest, right? And thus they don't have to do it. But also the sin of the lack of doing it falls away from it. In fact, the crime. So let's have a look at how this applies in jihad, the obligatory character of jihad. Jihad is a communal obligation. When enough people perform it to successfully accomplish it, it is no longer obligatory upon others. The evidence for which is Muhammad saying, he who provides the equipment for a soldier in jihad has himself performed jihad. If none of those concerned perform jihad, and it does not happen, then everyone who is aware that it is obligatory is guilty of sin. And the Hidayah tells us they're actually guilty of a crime. So jihad is a communal obligation, and there are two possible states in respect to non-Muslims. The first is when they are in their own countries, in which case jihad is a communal obligation. And thus, jihad is a communal obligation upon the Muslims each year. So this parallels exactly what happens in jihad. It's a communal obligation. But now let's look at what they say. Who may command the right and forbid the wrong? Because they're using these euphemisms. They don't say violence. They simply say you're commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. So they speak about, you can speak to the person politely, right? Or reviling him and harshness, or using reviling him and harshness, or forcibly stopping their acts, such as breaking musical instruments or pouring out wine, and finally, intimidation and threatening to strike the person or actually hitting him to stop what he is doing. Now that's interesting. They speak here of someone drinking wine or someone playing music. Or these are just examples of acts which violate the Sharia. So they can intimidate and threaten and then actually attack you. It goes on to say that if you are not enough alone, go get friends to attack him as a group. And if that's not enough, bring weapons. So yeah, that's what they mean by commanding the right and forbidding the wrong, or command what is good and prohibiting evil.
And even ignoring the distorted idea of what is right and wrong here, just note again that it's all about actions in Islam. It's not about your heart. It's not about it's not even really about your relationship with God. And we're going to see this over and over again in this Dawa manual, that the most important thing is your actions, not your ideas, not your thoughts, not your beliefs. The most important thing is your actions. A couple comments from the chat I wanted to take care of. A little while back, Saint El Arroy said that Allah is filled with hate for those who dislike his boyfriend Muhammad. I'm going to modify that a little and say that Allah is full of hate for those who don't like his puppeteer Muhammad.
Yeah. Kevin Robinson asked me about putting up a list of these references. I will do. All the other videos have like at least 7 or 8 links to different books and references that I've used. So I will do this after the show. We can do that, Thaddeus, and just put those in. Yeah.
Yep, that was the next thing I was going to bring up. Looks like Constance says, what if Muslims don't follow their imams when they demand jihad?
Then they are a weak Muslim. They actually are violating the law. In theory, they should be punished and also they are threatened with hell. They are sinning, they'll go to hell. But don't forget the pressure for them to do so is very severe. So they are considered that they're weak and it is better for them to obey. In our discussions on jihad, if you look at the channel, we actually discuss that specifically. They discuss what occurs there. Yeah. So let's maybe go to the next section here. But,
Yep. So getting back to the Dawa manual here, we see a couple of highlighted sentences which really just emphasize what we are saying about how Islam is all about actions. He said that believers shoulder the responsibility of promoting virtue and prohibiting vice in society. You would think that doing Dawa would mean, getting people to believe in Allah, but he's saying that one of the most important aspects of that is promoting outward appearances through good deeds. Religion is not merely a personal affair as perceived in the secular West. It forms the very fabric of society. That's not a statement that I would strongly disagree with, but at the same time, he's using this to justify making sure people do what Islam considers right, and not worrying about their beliefs as long as they're doing the right thing. Policing the society should not be left up to the government alone, but shared by the members of the community which constitute the society. Each Muslim is empowered to take the law into their own hands. My most recent video on terrorism looked at that as well, that if you are a Muslim living in a Muslim-dominated country, then it's perfectly fine for you to rely on the Sharia-compliant government to enforce the religious laws. But if you're not, then it falls into your own hands. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, I think we can see here that they actually are looking over each other's shoulders and they are policing each other, which is the same thing that happened in communist regimes, in totalitarian regimes. People were encouraged to tattletale and to enforce the law on their neighbors. So people are clearly self-policing here, which shows us this is a totalitarian form of government. And also, it forms the fabric of society. They're using euphemisms here, but religion rules everything. It's not a personal religion. It is something that is actually in charge above the government, above the law, above societal norms, behavior, dress, everything.
So then he goes on to talk a little bit more about obligation, and then he transitions into what we see all the time in Dawa, a attack on Christianity. Although he phrases it as an attack on all religions, it is really an attack on Christianity. He quotes this Quran verse, which is one of the first Quran verses that every Muslim learns. Say he is Allah the unique, Allah the self-sufficient. He did not give birth, nor is he born, and nothing is similar to him. Now this, he did not give birth, nor is he born, this is a direct attack on Christianity, or at least the Muslim distortion of Christianity. That is exactly why this is in there.
Yeah, if I can add something to that.
Yep.
So on that point, the major polemics of Islam will come from three major scholars. Now, there's numerous of them, but essentially it boils down to three scholars who were the specialists in the Islamic polemics against Christianity. You have Ibn Hazm, not all his works have been translated, and you have Ibn Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah. They've written books which are available today. Let's look at Ibn Qayyim. The fundamentals of the Christian religion are built on the vilification of God and joining partners to him, the fable of redemption. So the strayed people, the worshippers of the cross, right? We basically say that God entered the vagina of a woman who eats, drinks, urinates, evacuates her bowels, and menstruates. So this is an insult to God, right? And then he got attached to the inside of her abdomen, and he dwelled there for 9 months, wobbling between excrement, urine, and menstrual blood. Then he was born to be swaddled, put in the cradle, and each time he cried, his mother breastfed him. This is what happened to God. Then he went to the school with other boys. Then he ended up being slapped on the cheeks by Jews. This is what they say about our beliefs.
Yeah, some high degree of tolerance there, I would say.
Yep. And let's go on. They tell us that the Lord's Prayer, the prayer of the Christians, ridicules God. So we are insulting God. In fact, they say that Jesus is designed to be an insult to God, right? Our conception of Jesus. So they chose a way of prayer during which the most devoted and ascetic among them would consider it no great matter if he happens to pass urine dripping on his thighs and legs. Then he would take the direction of the east, make the sign of the cross, and worship the crucified deity, starting his prayer by saying, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done." But there are further references to this where they speak of we would be as likely to pray as to take a pee in our pants on the pews. This is the idea of church. This is what Muslims, and you'll see this on YouTube comments and Facebook comments.
Yeah, I mean, when people are learning this kind of stuff in the mosque, in their school systems, it's not hard to see why they would hate Christians. I mean, if you are taught this and you honestly believe that, you know, a Christian cares so little about God that they would urinate in their pants while they are praying, then of course you're going to say that Christians are evil.
Yeah. So this is what they're taught about us. I mean, that's their view of us. They're incredibly hostile to us.
And then I thought that this was pretty funny that he says that about this fact that most religions are ignorant. I mean, really, most religions teach that God gave birth and was born. I mean, come on, that's only a Christian belief, and not even really a Christian belief. So while he's phrasing it as most religions, it's really an attack on Christianity. So then and also keep in mind that he just brought this up in the middle of this section on why it's obligatory for Muslims to give dawah. It really had nothing to do with his point. He just wanted to put that in there to attack Christianity in a subtle way. He talks a little bit more about, you know, the importance of doing dawah and whatnot. On the next page, he goes on to say that Muslims who hide knowledge are going to hell, is what he says.
Yeah, he says that. So whoever hides knowledge by which Allah benefits people in their affairs of religion, Allah will bridle him on the day of resurrection with a bridle from the hellfire. So they are supposed to share their knowledge of Islam, right? That's what they tell us. They are supposed to share their knowledge of Islam and speak from knowledge. So they imply here to have knowledge of Islam but not convey it to others constitutes hiding knowledge, right? And in cases where people are asked about Islam but refuse to reveal its teachings, right? And people have refused to explain Islam to European Americans as they consider them to be devils or simply the enemy. So if we ask, they are supposed to reveal to us. So should I, any thoughts before I bring up something according to this, but your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to make a quick comment that, you know, this is a perfectly fine sounding thing. You know, you should reveal your knowledge about Islam. But what we find in practice is the exact opposite. Muslims going to extraordinary lengths to hide their beliefs on YouTube.
Yeah.
So either Bilal's wrong, or there's a lot of Muslim commenters on YouTube who are going to go to hell.
That may be true. But now what's interesting, if we go back to these notes of mine, so let's have a look in the section called Giving Directions to Wrongdoers from the Sharia. And just to answer a question sent to Leora, the book that I'm referring to is Ibn Qayyim's book. It is called A Guide to the Bewildered in Reply to the Jews and the Christians, sometimes called A Guide to the Uncertain in Reply to the Jews and the Christians. So let us have a look here at section K1.2, which is the section on commerce and sales. I'm going to enlarge this so everyone can see it a little better. This is from the Sharia. And this is from the Reliance of the Traveler, the world's most famous Sharia manual, most common Sharia manual. If a Quran is being purchased for someone, it is obligatory that the person be Muslim, which implies Christians should not be sold these books, non-Muslims. The same is true of books of Hadith and books containing the words and deeds of the early Muslims. Quran in this context means any work that contains some of the Quran, even a slight amount. So already we're being told that we should know nothing about their beliefs and their books. We should not have their books. This ruling holds for any religious books, even the Tabaqat of Sharani, and we don't have to discuss him now. But it says that this is a collection of biographical sketches of Muslims. Though, and the only exception is the Hanafi school, permits non-Muslims to buy or be given the Quran and other Islamic books. So 3 of the 4 schools forbid it. The Hanafi school, I think, is one of the smaller ones. So they generally don't want us to know what their beliefs are. Any comments before I go to the last item here?
No, go ahead and get through this. There's some stuff in the chat, but
Okay. So now what they speak of, now don't forget, this is about giving directions to wrongdoers, okay? Wrongdoers. These are giving help, basically giving help to people who want to do wrong or evil. So one of the first thing they mention is showing the way to policemen, right? And tyrants when they're going to commit injustice and corruption. Don't forget, corruption means to entice someone away from Islam. Corruption means temptation. That's how they translate this in the Sharia. Specifically, corruption means not they're corrupt, they're the mafia. No, it just means temptation away from Islam towards another belief. Okay. And then two, here's another thing. Now, apparently they have to work from knowledge and teach us and give us advice, but yet it says it is wrong for them, it is a sin for them and a crime to teach Sharia law, sacred law, to those learning it in bad faith, who do not want the knowledge to apply it in their lives, but for an unworthy purpose. For instance, we are not trying to become Muslims. So we're not learning Sharia law to live like Muslims. We want to destroy Islam. That is an unworthy purpose. Therefore, they should not teach us anything about the Sharia.
very good. Well, not very good that they don't want to teach us. So Inda asked for a link to the material that we are presenting. There's already a link to Bilal's guide to doing dawah in the description, and we will add links to some of the supplemental materials after the broadcast.
In one of the previous videos, you'll see in the description, you'll find a ton of links to the Reliance and so on and other Sharia books. Go to any of the previous videos prior to this, like the ones on jihad or demi status, you'll find the references to the necessary books there.
Yeah, I believe this is like the 7th or 8th video we've done on Islam's apologetics. Pretty much all of them have that phrase in the title. So just look at any of those. There's 2 on jihad. I would start there.
Yeah. So yeah, onto this.
So one quick comment on what you were saying a minute ago about, hiding the knowledge. In the opening paragraph, Bilal said that, you're called to bring people to Islam with certain knowledge or true knowledge or something like that. But that's complete nonsense, because as we're seeing, what constitutes knowledge is doing what he considers to be morally right. It has nothing to do with what we would call knowledge.
Yeah.
So moving on, so we've now looked at Bilal's definition of what it means to do dawah and why you should do dawah. So now he's going to talk about the characteristics that are necessary for a person giving dawah. And he quotes this rather odd hadith here, odd in that it doesn't seem to serve his purposes. He quotes, "Islam began as something strange and it will return as something strange. So give glad tidings to the strangers."
Yeah,
he's quoting it because for that last part, I get in part to, give glad tidings to strangers. And he's also quoting it as a way of saying that there is only one correct Islam. The thing is that this verse in its actual meaning, for Islam to begin as something strange, meaning it started with very few adherents, and it will return as something strange, meaning before the Antichrist comes, before the end times, it will return to only having a few true followers. So it's, it's just kind of exactly contrary to his purposes, but he doesn't care. As long as he can use it for something, he'll quote it.
Yeah. That's just weird.
So then, yep. So he goes on to define what the correct type of Islam is, and he says that it is in accordance with the understanding of the early righteous generations of Muslims. Lloyd, what did the earliest generations of Muslims teach? Did they teach peace and love, or something else?
No, they did not. Remember, they were, all of them, warlords. They followed the example of Muhammad. And in fact, all 3, the warlords who succeeded Muhammad, were each killed by the preceding warlord. They were all murdered by each other. In fact, even Aisha went to war.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I mean, I thought that this idea that Islam is peaceful is a modern invention, but just wanted to make sure.
And it says there's only one way to follow the religion, which is the way of the early followers of Muhammad.
Yep. So if you are not doing the same things they did, then you are not correctly following Islam. Um, Especially if you're one of these people who come in here and say that you can tell us which hadith are true and which ones aren't. No, you can't do that. The scholars have decided long ago which ones actually go back to Muhammad. And if you deny the truth of any of the hadith, say, for example, the hadith about Muhammad saying that the sun sets in a pool of water, well, then you are denying the original Islam.
Yeah.
So then he goes on and says, quotes this Quran verse here: "Do not be of the pagans, of those who split up their religion and became sects, each sect rejoicing in what it has." And then it goes on to quote.
So he tells us that we have split up and we have fractured and we are misled. But then he goes on to say the very same thing about the Muslims.
Yeah, as I was going to say, he goes on to quote this hadith about how the previous religions, the people of the book, that would be the Jews and the Christians, split into 72 sects, and the followers of Islam are going to split up into 73 sects, 72 of which will end up in hellfire, and only one go to paradise. So 72 out of every 73 Muslims are going to hell. A very odd thing to quote in this book about Dawah from our point of view. But I think what he's doing here is, he's saying, if you're not following the original Islam, if you're not following exactly the teachings of all the scholars, then you're not really doing Dawah because you are not following Islam. Do you have some thoughts on that?
I know, but also it says that the vast majority of Muslims are going, 99% of Muslims are going to hell. They're wrong. They're misguided. So how do they know who is correct? Because as we saw when we did the first show on jihad, they say very much that the group that is the most correct has to kill the group that is wrong. So how do you know you're most correct? That's why there were the apostasy wars and so on right after Muhammad died, because you are bound to kill the ones who are wrong. Well, they all think everyone else is wrong. That's why they're killing each other.
Take a little break here to address a couple of comments. Earlier, Marcus said that this will be the downfall of Islam, by this meaning the refusal to share information. And I agree that, Islam has survived for the last 1400 years primarily by not exposing Muslims to any information. If everyone you know is a Muslim and everyone agrees that Islam is true, then you kind of just accept it as true without thinking about it. But they can't do that anymore. And I think that is going to definitely be the downfall of Islam. Peter Orthodox asks, what would you say to Muslims who question the authenticity of the Bible? For example, Epistle of Hebrews, which is attributed to Apostle Paul, but no one knows who wrote it. So I think that we'll get more into that in coming episodes. Just briefly, I would say it doesn't actually matter who wrote it. What matters is whether it's true or not. So, it could be written by the most intelligent, most important person in the world, but if it's false, then it's not worth following. And in contrast, if it's anonymous, if you don't know who wrote it, but it's true, then it's still worthwhile material. Did you want to address any of the comments, or?
That's a good question. I'm just thinking about that because I've obviously dealt with a lot of this. Yeah, look, they are not trying to learn the truth. They're trying to destroy your beliefs. They're merely trying to win. So they're not really being honest. They've never read the Bible. They simply believe what their scholars tell them is in the Bible. Notice they all repeat the same things, right? And those things that they got from the scholars were originally gotten from Ibn Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah, and those are in their books. And we will be discussing those in the future. So really, I think if they were honestly trying to listen to you, if you gave them the truth and they listened and they said, okay, well, fine, yes, thanks. But notice that no matter what you tell them, eventually they'll repeat the same polemic. So I think you should rather try to win. And we use the facts. So start talking about some of the inconsistencies and some of the major issues in their books. For instance, they say that an inconsistency in the four gospels means that all four gospels are false. Well, find me two biographies of Muhammad that agree. Any two, pick two. I don't care. Find them. If they agree, that'll be a miracle, because I tell you, it doesn't exist. Hadith that contradict each other all over the place, right? Seriously, you'll find dozens that just say different things. So yeah, you're going to find, like, for instance, you'll find the woman that poisoned Muhammad to death. Well, he was kind to her, he forgave her, he let her go. Those are the modern ones. Go read the original ones. They killed her. How do you square that circle? So loads of issues there. So we can start to talk about, in fact, as you go into the next thing, that is, I'll go and get some other stuff where we can talk about some of the things about Muhammad you can throw back. And you can say, look, tell me about this then. If you have a problem with that, then we have a problem with this, tell me about this. And we can throw some really interesting facts back at them.
Yeah, we'll open it up for general questions here in a bit. We're just got a few more pages on the characteristics of the caller, and I think we'll end it there for today after we get through that section. But in the later sections of his work, Bilal Phillips goes into both how to counteract Christianity, and he brings, he raises these same kind of objections that you hear over and over again. So when we get to that section, we'll be looking at how to address those things that they are trained to throw at us.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring up, so in a minute or two, I'll have some things ready which you can then utilize. Sorry, my bad. I need to move this over. Yeah, let me just flip this over, and then so next section, Thaddeus, and I'll just quickly get some of these notes ready.
Yes. We were talking about the sects of Islam, and then after that he goes in to say that there's a lot of different things you can call people to, but there's one essential thing that when you're going to the Jews and Christians, that you must tell them about the oneness of Allah, i.e. Tawheed. And then he goes through several paragraphs basically saying absolutely nothing about what Tawheed is. He has all this flowery language about how it rules every aspect of your life and how it does this and that, but then he doesn't actually really define what it means. It's the most important characteristic of Islam. It's the one essential thing that you have to call everyone to, and all he can say is a bunch of empty words about it. So I guess that was actually the end of the section on the okay, so that was still the introduction. We had gotten to the section on the characteristics of the caller. My mistake. So the first characteristic of the caller is knowledge. Now, we have an idea what knowledge means, but Bilal has a little bit of a different idea of what knowledge means. But the most important thing I want to point out in this section here is this line in green. If the Muslim missionary is ignorant, his message will appear weak. The most important thing is not the content of the message. It is that you appear strong, that you appear confident. And you'll see this in Muslim apologists online, that they speak really loudly and boldly and proclaim with great confidence whatever they're saying. It doesn't matter what they're saying. That they might be saying that Muhammad, or that Allah does not pray to Muhammad, he prays for Muhammad. And somehow this is a refutation of the idea that
who's Allah praying to for Muhammad?
Yeah.
You got to wonder, so who does Allah pray to when he wants to pray for someone? It makes no sense. Thanks, Muhammad Ijab, for that.
And then all the Muslims in the crowd go, "Yay, you refuted David Wood." And it's like, no, you just repeated exactly what he said, but you said it with a lot of bravado, and no one was paying attention to what your actual words. So they all thought that you had refuted him somehow.
Yeah, that's a very different culture. So, how long are we going to go, Thaddeus? I'm just curious, because we probably
let's just run through the 5 characteristics real quick.
Okay,
it won't take very long, and then we'll end it at that.
Yeah, because I've got something that to answer that question about the counter polemics or whatever. That I have that ready now.
So let's just run through these characteristics real quick. They're not particularly time consuming.
Yeah, but it says you must not appear weak. They're really that you don't have to be strong. You must have sound knowledge, but yet they have no authority to talk about the Sharia. They're not allowed to.
Right. And he says knowledge is a prerequisite for the faith, but at the same time, we know that all you really have to do is say the Shahada. You don't even have to mean it.
Well, let me remember that section that we had in the early in the beginning. Remember there was that. Sorry, let me move this over. Remember we showed yesterday. Oh, my bad. Remember we showed yesterday about the section where in the Reliance it says that they don't need any knowledge whatsoever. They must just believe without thinking. Sorry about that. I just need to get to that section, and I've of course lost my place. So it's supposed to be A1.4. Do you remember that reference we discussed yesterday, Thaddeus?
Yes. That the I don't know the exact words of it, but the gist of it is that the Muslim who just believes without thinking about it is the superior Muslim. That the one who questions things that's to be discouraged, and you only answer these questions if it's absolutely necessary. If you answer the questions for someone who doesn't need the question answered, then you're just going to decrease their faith.
Yeah, I'll find that in a moment. But while I have this up, and it says here, the basic premise of this school of thought, right, is that good is not what reason considers good, and nor is the bad what reason considers bad, right? Good and bad, according to Islam, is the sacred law. It is Sharia, not reason. They want you to obey. They don't want you to think. Right. I'll find the other reference later. Once I swap out the screen. So.
Yep, you can continue to look for that. Scroll down to the second characteristic, which is kindness. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with kindness. He says that the da'i is to be soft in conveying the message because harshness could easily discourage people from listening to the truth. The problem here is not the advice he's giving, but rather the practice. That every Muslim I have talked to who is attempting to do dawah is a very angry person, that they are very hateful. They come out with me with all kinds of names. So the problem here is that his advice doesn't match practice. The third characteristic he gets into is wisdom. Not particularly a lot of interesting material to say on that.
Oh, sorry, I skipped forward.
Nope.
Yeah, fine. Wisdom. Yeah. Use appropriate material, but they don't. They just repeat the same polemic. In fact, when we speak about Sharia, they just start attacking the Bible. There's no logic there.
Right, and his definition of wisdom is pretty empty here. So there's not really much to say. Basically, just says that wisdom is giving the correct information or approaching things with righteousness and happiness. So not a lot to say about that. The next one is patience. Again, perfectly reasonable advice. If you want to talk to someone, you should be patient with them. But again, doesn't match practice. In fact, this one's even more ridiculous than kindness, I think. That, every Muslim I talk to online has a really short fuse. That the second I say anything, even very nicely ask them a question about Islam, it's like, oh, you cross worshiper, get out of here, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then the final and most interesting of the 5 characteristics is morality. He says, great stress has been placed in Islam on good moral character. No kidding. This is all Muslims ever want to talk about. They want to tell me how great they are because they don't eat pork. They want to tell me how great they are because they do not drink alcohol. They want to tell me how evil Christians are because some women in secular Western nations are promiscuous, and on and on. And the pork one especially cracks me up because there's nothing all that exceptional about eating pork. I wouldn't care if I never ate pork again the rest of my life. Yet somehow this is some great virtue of the Muslim that they've given this massive sacrifice by not eating pork. And I think that they put a high emphasis on pork specifically because it is distinct. It is a characteristic of Islam that is different than Christianity, but it's also incredibly easy to do. So it's, it's something that every Muslim can do. And that's why they put so much emphasis on pork.
Notice the sleight of mouth here, where they say, Muhammad, you have a magnificent character. They're not referring to his personality or his personal behavior. Ibn Abbas explained that character here meant religion, i.e. Islam. So it's actually, Muhammad, you have a magnificent religion. That doesn't say anything about Muhammad. So suddenly they're applying a new interpretation to this. So Muhammad is not the ideal or perfect man. It says he had the perfect religion. That says nothing about his personal attributes. Character refers to the religion of Islam. And his character, Aisha said his character was that of the Quran. His manners were according to Allah's instructions in the Quran. And we know what Allah's instructions are, is to kill the infidels. So the development of good character depends on closely following the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet. And we know that the teachings are to make war on unbelievers.
Right. I mean, here we have it again, that it's all about actions. It's not about what we would consider character. It's not about having, good moral understandings. It's about what you do and what you do only. And then, of course, hear that Muhammad has the magnificent character of all. So what are some of the kinds of things that we can see in a person with a perfect moral character according to Islam? Well, we can see that it's perfectly okay to marry a 6-year-old girl when you are in your 50s. It's perfectly okay to have sex with her when she reaches the age of 9. It is perfectly okay to rob caravans that are being driven by non-Muslims. It's perfectly okay to torture someone for not revealing the hiding place of their treasure. It's perfectly okay to wage war on anyone who is not a Muslim. Perfectly okay to have in your sacred revelation that a man is limited to 4 wives, while you yourself have between 11 and 13 at the same time, and so on.
Yeah. I have the section on the doubts.
Excellent.
So it says, if a Muslim has doubts and his doubt cannot be eliminated except by learning one of the theologian's proofs, then it is obligatory for him to learn it in order to remove the doubt and acquire the belief in question. Scholars disagree. So they have to then, if they simply should accept, they must only be given evidence if they cannot bring themselves to believe. So you can acquire the belief. So you must have the belief without evidence, and they must only be given information if they can't simply bring themselves to believe. That is really crazy.
Yeah, for real. I mean, the reason I am a Christian is because there's lots of good, solid evidence that Christianity is true, but that is totally contrary to what Islam thinks is the best way to approach your religion.
Well, it says here, what befits the common people and the vast majority of those learning or possessing sacred knowledge is to not discuss scholastic theology, unless corruption, difficult to eliminate, find its way into their basic religious convictions. So they should not look at the subtleties of their theology unless they find themselves losing faith. Now, to examine your theology might cause you to lose faith. That is crazy. You should confine themselves to contentment with the above-mentioned absolute certainty without examining the scholastic theology.
Yeah, I mean, I have truth on my side. I always tell people to look at things for themselves. I always encourage people to go to greater depth.
And it says here, what he meant thereby was the heretical scholastic theology that put rational theories ahead of the Quran and Sunnah. This is the Sharia. It is heretical to put rational theories ahead of the Quran and the Sunnah.
Yeah, so
that is insane.
It's anti-Islamic to use your reason to determine what is true.
Yeah. Yeah, I have those other notes to answer the question that came earlier. If
let's finish up the talk on the moral before we get to that. But
okay. Yep.
We had a good comment from Zuka in the chat he says the problem is that Muslims don't listen and don't read. They just blindly follow what has been said to them. And he said that before. You
They
proved.
told them. I mean, yeah. And it says that any Muslim who displays bad manners, such as swearing or lying, is a hypocrite pretending to be a Muslim or a very weak Muslim. It says right here.
Yep. So that's what I wanted to comment on, that, I get multiple Muslims a day swearing at me. So I guess there's a lot of hypocritical Muslims out there.
Yeah, this is what they taught, and this is not what they do. And it should be noted, there are dozens of these courses out there. Any one of you could, I don't know, take a false name and go join a Dawah course online. There's plenty of them. There's loads of these books.
So I think that pretty much wraps up the characteristics of the caller. Unless you have anything else you wanted to say about that, we can first look at the answer to the question and then open it up for general questions in the chat.
No, that's it. I can just quickly go through these. It's stuff I've done before, but things, if we need to turn, okay, so these people are doing polemics and we've been doing apologetics for too long. We need to turn this around and we need to put the shoe on the other foot, right? So it says here, for instance, if we look at the Milal wa Nihal, long before the creation of the world, Allah took a ray of light from the splendor of his own glory and united it to the body of Muhammad. So Allah took a piece of himself, right, and attached it to Muhammad. So Muhammad is made of the essence of Allah. Muhammad is then a partner of Allah, saying, you are the elect, the chosen. I will make the members of your family the guides to salvation. So Muhammad said, the first thing which Allah created was my light and my spirit. Muhammad was the first thing that Allah, the applying God, Yahweh in this case, obviously created. The light of the world, the first spirit was Mo. Believe it or not, it's called the Nur-i Muhammadi, the light of Muhammad.
Crazy stuff.
So in the Kitab Ahwal-i-Qiyamat, we read the following. God first created a tree, and this would be the Jewish tree of life, with 4,000 branches, and called it the tree of life. Then he created the light of Muhammad. So after God created life, he created Muhammad. And then he placed Muhammad in a white pearl in the shape of a peacock, and he placed it on the tree where Muhammad praised God for 70,000 years. And then, right, it says here, then they speak of the Kaaba was created before Jerusalem. Then, of course, God created the people of the believers, the Muslims, right? He then created the spirits of the Jews and the Christians afterwards. So that's why all the prophets were Muslims, because Christians and Jews came afterwards. After this, when the light of Muhammad had praised God for 70,000 years, God created the light of the prophets out of the light of Muhammad. So all the prophets from Abraham, Noah, David, you name it, all the way to Jesus, were made out of Muhammad. And then they said, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the apostle of Allah. Then God created a lamp and the figure of Muhammad, and then he put Muhammad's figure on that lamp, and then the spirits of heaven went around the light of Muhammad, praising and worshiping Muhammad for 100,000 years. Then God commanded the spirits that he created, the souls basically, to look upon the form of Muhammad, and they all obeyed. Those spirits who looked at his head became caliphs and sultans. Those spirits of man who saw his forehead became a commander. Those who saw his eyes became one who knows the word of God by heart, right? And it goes on and on and on. So, and of course, then we have, and those who saw nothing, we'll get to that in a minute, I just forgot to add that in. So, and those who saw his arms became Muslims, right? And those who saw nothing became Jews and Christians. This is how this tradition goes on, those who saw nothing. Now, notice it says here, when Muhammad was being born, right? Muhammad fell into my hands at birth, and a voice reached my ears saying, the Lord show mercy unto thee, and the face of the earth became so illuminated that I could see some of the palaces of Damascus by that light. That is a distance of more than 1,300 kilometers, over 810 miles. right? But it gets better because this is one example where they've softened the language. But other Sirah, and you can read several of them, literally say that Muhammad was obviously in her belly, and a light came out of her vagina that shone all the way to Busra in Syria, 810 miles, 1,300 kilometers, and lit up the palaces, and she could see them. It literally says it came out of her vajayjay, right? This is the device that apparently was, I don't know, you tell me, right? And now this is Ibn Kathir. Muhammad's birth and 40 years prior to his prophethood, when he was born, a light issued out of my pudendum and lit the palaces of Syria. That's Muhammad's mother. And there were significant precursors that accompanied his birth. 14 galleries of Kisra's palace cracked and rolled down. The Magian sacred fire died down, and some churches on Lake Sawa sank down and collapsed. And here we go. Sorry, I forgot. This is a section I put out of. So those who saw his shadow became a singer and a player, and those who saw nothing became a Jew, a Christian, an infidel, and a magician. Right? Let's go on. Let's look at the Ashifa. This is the most authentic and the most revered, the most praised biography of Muhammad. This is the equivalent of the Gospels. The Prophet was born circumcised with his umbilical cord cut. Now, if you read some of the others, like Sirat Rasulullah, Jesus was circumcised after 8 days as per Jewish law. So Muhammad goes one better. He's born circumcised. Then Aisha says, I never saw the private parts of the messenger. I never, ever saw the private. That's what his wife said. And then the other, his son says, his adopted son says, the Prophet asked me after he died to make sure that no one except me washed him. He said, no one has seen me naked without going blind. This is from the most important gospel of Muhammad, the Ashifa. No one saw Muhammad without going blind. I mean, maybe that's why they have the burqa, right?
I guess.
So you tell me. Let's have a look. One of the scholars concerned with reports about the Prophet and his qualities related that when he wanted to defecate, the earth split open, swallowed up his feces and urine, and it gave off a fragrant smell. So the people of knowledge still mention the purity of his feces and urine. Just a few things. Now, if we ask Muslims this, maybe they need to explain this to us. What do you think, Thaddeus?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if they actually believe this, maybe they should be talking about it. I mean, this is some pretty miraculous stuff. You might even say that this kind of material is makes Muhammad into a god.
It does. It does. Muhammad is a partner of Allah. I mean, this goes on and on and on. This is just a little bit of it.
So in the comments, going back a little bit, as you were starting to get in this material, Miss Picky said that this is stolen from Jesus, who's called the light of the world. Very true.
Yes.
That's one of the inspirations of this material. I think there might also be some inspiration from Moses having the glory of God on his face after receiving the divine law. Veronica said this is blasphemy. No kidding. This is ridiculous. Imagine if this, take every reference in this that says Muhammad and change it to Jesus and pretend it's a Christian manual. You know, every Muslim in the world would be talking about the ridiculous blasphemy of making Jesus God. Yet when it's a description of Muhammad, somehow it means he's just a prophet.
But also, why don't our books contain loads of slander, insults, and blasphemy about other religions and other people? They specifically name us. And then also, it must be noted that the most prolific miracle of Muhammad, and they call his magical pooping a miracle, okay? It is specifically called, if you read the books, his poops are miracles. Every time he went to take a dump, because trees walked behind him to cover him, to protect him from being seen when he went to go poo-poo. This is a miracle of Muhammad. Understand? So the most prolific miracle of Muhammad is taking a poop every day. I mean, disgusting. I mean, where do you find this in the New Testament?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have anything so ridiculous. I wonder why.
I mean, they call us disgusting. People drank his urine. People literally drank his urine. People literally licked his spit. people literally ate his blood.
Yeah, crazy stuff.
I mean, and it says, don't forget that his poop didn't stink. I mean, like, seriously, are we supposed to take this seriously? Why don't Muslims discuss this? I think we should confront them as often as possible and say, you got some explaining to do.
So Veronica asked what book this text is from. I know you mentioned it a couple times, but go ahead and let everyone know again where I believe there's two sources.
So the major source here, I read from various sources. There was the Ashifa, Ashshifa. The Ashifa is the major sira, the biography, prophetic biography of Muhammad. There's more than one version of the Ashifa, so there are two that I've used here. I've also used the Ibn Kathir's biography of Muhammad, and I've utilized some other scholarly works that are quoting books that have not been translated, but they have sections of them that have been translated, so they're using those sections and discussing them. Like this one is Ibn Kathir. This is what was apparently lighting up Syria. This one is, these are from traditions. The Milal wa Nihal and stuff like that. The Kidab al-Ahwal, you can't find these in English. I've tried. If they exist, I don't know where they are. But yes, these are translations of these by scholars, and they just discuss these sections of them.
Very good. So earlier, before we got into this material, there was a lot of chatter about Islam suppressing logic, suppressing reason. Everyone thought that was pretty ridiculous, and I agree completely. There was a good comment about how the so-called golden age of Islam, when Islam first conquered all of these different lands, suddenly they had all kinds of new knowledge that they basically stole from the people they conquered. They joined up that knowledge, and they came up with some innovations as a result. But then he said, and the reason this golden age died out is because they were suppressing reason, and I agree completely.
Well, yeah, I mean that much is clear. Yeah, I agree with that. So that's all from me, though. In terms of this discussion, but hopefully we understand a bit more about what they're being taught on these Dawah courses, how they're being taught, and we can start to understand their perspective and understand them. I think it gets more technical and gets more interesting as we go through. So this is our first run through of this, but hopefully it opens up a door that hasn't been opened before.
Yeah, and today we just looked at the characteristics or definition of what dawah is and the characteristics of the person doing the dawah, the caller, as Bilal calls them. Next time we'll look at the section that's called characteristics of the callee, and then we'll get into the techniques he suggests using to reach the callee.
Yeah, the techniques are very interesting when they discuss that. A final point, it should be noted, I've been putting together, thanks to Villainous SSB with some information he gave me, a discussion about the fact that Islam is a Gnostic religion. And it should be noted that in Gnosticism, the body is considered unclean and only spirit is clean. Hence, Muhammad was pure because he couldn't have impurity in his body. Hence the focus on the fact that his urine and his feces were pure and sweet and smell good, like musk. This is due to the Gnostic influence, and that's why, because they have a Gnostic Jesus called Esau, who's not Jesus, but Esau, because they have a Gnostic Jesus, therefore it is considered in Gnosticism that Jesus would never have had a physical body, because the flesh is icky, the flesh is dirty. So that's why they consider it that we are blaspheming by having Jesus have a physical body. Hopefully that makes sense. I'll cover that. We'll cover that in a discussion, in a more detailed discussion. I'm preparing the slides and going through the data at the moment.
Yeah, that should definitely be some very interesting material, because we see this a lot in the comment sections, ranging from the very immature people who are like, oh, your God pooped, lol, to more substantial, well, not more substantial, but more polite, more nice sounding comments about, asking why Jesus had to eat, and asking why Jesus had to, or why he sweat and why he bled, and all these things.
Well, they don't realize that these are literally Gnostic arguments going back to prior to the creation of Islam. In fact, Gnosticism started after Christianity as a pushback, and if you look at the arguments of Gnosticism, those are the arguments of Islam. it's actually Gnosticism was a reaction to the Gospels. And so Islam, for instance, Gnosticism claimed it came to correct the mistakes of the Gospels. And that's exactly what Muslims claim. And if you look at, for instance, Muhammad didn't meet Christians until a little bit late in his career. He never had a Bible. He, first of all, had Waraka, who was either an Ebionite or an Arian, right, who was a Gnostic, heretic. And then B, in Busra in Syria, he meets a monk called Nestor, Nestorian monk called Nestor. I think that's pretty blatant. So he meets at least 3 different Gnostic sects, and he gets all this Gnostic nonsense. And all the stories in the Quran, like the little birds, those are taken from Gnostic texts. So Jesus, and then later on, they discovered the Bible, they discovered Christians, and went, oops, we made a mistake, but didn't admit to their mistake.
Yeah, well, that's when it was too late. They already had all this claimed revelation, which was just copied and pasted out of the Gnostic texts, and they couldn't say, well, the revelation was wrong, so it must be the Christian sources that are wrong, even though those sources are much more early. And what any historian, even an atheist historian those are the only sources they would take as evidence of who the historical Jesus was.
Yeah. Marcus Tanbeck just mentioned the word kalamullah, right? The word of Allah. Now, don't forget, in the Quran, it says that that Jesus was the word of Allah sent down, the word and the spirit. Now, the thing is, if Jesus was the word and the spirit of Allah sent down, was Allah without the word and the spirit because they were now on earth in the body of Jesus? Or is he then a part of Allah sent down, part of his word, part of his spirit, making him divine, making him a partner with Allah? These are questions that the Quran avoids. But that's a real question. If Jesus is the word and the spirit, then we are right to worship him because he is Allah's presence on earth. But notice, Allah is not a God that comes to earth. He is spirit only. That again is a Gnostic belief because the God that created the world is an evil God. So these are all entirely Gnostic beliefs. But Jesus being a part of God we are then accurately worshiping Jesus being part of God.
Yeah, I think that taking a good look at Gnostic beliefs will clear up a lot of the really confusing aspects of the Quran when you understand the theology that motivated it.
And the Sharia explicitly says that Islam is Gnostic.
Much earlier, Farrakh said that maybe because he was so white, I assume that's in reference to why looking upon Muhammad's naked body would blind him. And that's a good joke there because, the Hadith are always going on and on about how amazingly white Muhammad's arms were and how amazingly white his armpits were and how amazingly white his chest was and amazingly white his feet were. And
of course, they also state how fat he was, but you don't hear them talking about that. It says Muhammad was a dwarf and fat. But I don't hear them talking about that.
Well, they don't want to talk about how white he was either because they want to say that Islam is the religion of the non-white people and Christianity is the religion of the white people.
Yeah, we'll have to get into Muhammad specifically at some point as well, into more of these. So, any final questions? Because that's it from me.
Let's see. A lot of chatter about how Muslims worship Muhammad, and we agree completely. I would say that it's 100% certain that if you took some Islamic texts, took out all the references to Muhammad, make up a deity's name, pretend that is your deity's name, go to a Muslim and say, this is a story about my prophet, they'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? This is clearly a deity. But for some reason, they can't see it when they look at their own text. Collecting Muhammad's spit and using it as perfume, collecting Muhammad's sweat and using it as perfume, drinking Muhammad's urine, that's all perfectly normal. That's just what you do with an ordinary human being in Islam, apparently.
Yeah, disgusting. Yeah, so I think that they are, which is also why they focus. I mean, they focus on Quran and Hadith because they can't deal with these things. I mean, they've written them, and to lie about Muhammad is a one-way ticket to hell. So why would their scholars lie like this?
So Mafan asked, did the Gnostic Gospels accept the death and resurrection of Jesus?
Uh, I don't. I need to look deeper into some of the stuff. But no, some of them say he was spirit only. Some of them say he was partly God. Some he was only man. Some they're all over the place. There's about 4 different positions, right, in terms of what Jesus was: only man, only God, mostly God, a little bit man, mostly man, a little bit God. Basically, you got these 4 positions. But basically, according to that, no, he did not die, could not die because he was spirit only.
Yeah, one of the Gnostic texts that do contain the crucifixion, what they'll say is that the Spirit of God had just descended on the human Jesus, and then the Spirit departed before the crucifixion took place. So that would be the little bit human theory, probably.
Yeah, there's 4 schools. It's the Ebionites, the Arians, the I just mentioned it earlier, the Nestorians, and there's one other. So there's 4 major sects, and yeah, so that's something I'll get into without, yeah. So especially as it relates to Islam, but Islam, if you read the Sharia, explicitly states that Islam is Gnostic, and that the Sufis, the saints of Islam, are Gnostics.
Yes. So Veronica just asked recently, how could a Dawa team use such texts? So I'm not 100% certain which texts we're referring to at this point, because that was when you were talking about the Gnostic texts. So I don't know if that's going
So
back
your
to the
basic Dawa, your
biographies.
Dawist, your basic Dawa or Da'i is not aware of this knowledge. He is only allowed to speak about Quran and Sunnah. He's not allowed to talk about Sharia. In fact, he probably doesn't know a lot of it, unless he's taken the time to educate himself. But no, you have to be of a higher level to talk. There's these levels. Your basic Da'i is at the Ibara level, which is the very basic plain meaning level. He's only allowed to explore Quran and Sunnah, Hadith basically, not even the Sirah. Then above him is your imams, that the ishara level, they're allowed to go into these things. There's 4 levels of imams, and above that you have 2 levels, lataif and the haqaiq, and those are reserved for the Sufis.
Yeah, it goes back to that passage we were reading in the Sharia law that, basically everyone should be given basic knowledge and only basic knowledge. And you only give other knowledge when it's absolutely necessary, because the other knowledge for most people would just cause them to stop believing in Islam.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially this. You throw this at them, the stuff about the Sirah, about he was worshipped for 100,000 years by all the spirits that are our souls. Remember, all the souls of the people were worshipping. We've all worshipped Muhammad as spirits in heaven before we were born for 100,000 years.
Yep, that we all worship that ordinary human prophet who was created before the foundation of the
It was just a plain water, yeah, who was made from the light of Allah, and all the prophets were made out of his light. Yeah, that guy. Yep.
Some confusing stuff in Islam, which is why this knowledge is not usually given out, because a lot of people can look at it and say, this doesn't make any sense. This is just a bunch of conglomeration of incompatible beliefs thrown together, and pretend that it all makes sense. So if there are no further comments or questions from the chat, I think we'll be wrapping up here in a minute. As I said, this is just part 1. This Dawa manual is about 100 pages long, and we looked at maybe 15 pages, 20 pages, something like that. So obviously,
Does it have page numbers? No, we're about a quarter way through.
Yeah, so we're going to do several episodes on this. I personally have not really seen anyone on YouTube talking about Dawa, and I think that it's important that Christians know the arguments that they're being trained to use, because we see the same thing over and over again from every Muslim who comes into the comment section. Maybe 5% come up with something unique, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
At least 95% repeat the exact same things, almost word for word, and they're clearly getting it from somewhere. And where they're getting it is from training courses just like this. So all the average Muslim who's going to try to talk to you online knows is the material on this. And if you know how to refute the material on this, then they will have nothing to offer in return.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's it from me. yeah, I hope you guys learned something. We've learned a lot from this as well. And hopefully we'll get really good at this and start to be able to refute this arguments. And yeah, I don't think they've got a lot once we've taken this away from them. They don't have a lot to play with anymore.
Yeah, I'll just close by saying, I want everyone to get something out of this material besides entertainment. I mean, we looked at some funny material, which is definitely pretty entertaining, but that's not the main purpose here. The main purpose is to educate, inform, so you can use this in your conversations with Muslims, and even in your conversations with Christians. Let them know what Islam really teaches. There's a lot of lies that coming from Islamic organizations that most people just buy into about, Islam being very similar to Christianity, and that we should just all get along because there's not much difference to begin with. So that's all I have. You have any final words you want to?
No, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, if you guys have questions, in the comments, we'll find you then. And thank you for being here with us.
Yep. If you have any further comments or questions, just leave them down below in the comment section. Both Lloyd and I do monitor that. I know not every channel looks at their comments, but we definitely do. So leave your comments, questions. We'll get the news, and we'll post the links to the material we talked about today. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day, whether that is just a couple hours or whether your day is just starting, depending on what part of the world you are. God bless, and have a good rest of your day.
Take care, guys. See you soon. Bye.